Well, hello YouTube, and welcome to Monday's edition of The Breakfast Club. I'm Got That Funk. I'd like to thank you for joining me. This video is inspired by a conversation that I had with both JJ Talks and one of her viewers on a video she did a week or so, two ago maybe, with her boyfriend. And in that video they mentioned that there's a 9-year age gap between them. And in a comment I said that I don't really think there's a problem with age gaps as long as people are of a adult mature age, and and no one's lying to the other party. That's to me the two biggest issues. And in the comment, JJ rightly points out there can be a power dynamic issue sometimes that comes into play, and I would agree with that in principle for sure. That potential exists. And that potential can exist even outside of age gaps, when people are in, like a teacher or someone's patient or their doctor or that kind of thing. There's an awful lot of other examples you could come up with, and I think, there's definitely a risk that there could be power dynamics which put one party at the disadvantage. But I pointed out that that's not always the older person who's the manipulator or the one who isn't prone to being manipulated. And one of her viewers sort of chastised me basically for my position and said that my point of view was coming from a place of, trying to come up with shitty excuses for my own behavior, is what she was certainly implying. And that's because I'm no stranger to age gaps. It's true, and it's because of that, though, that I think I've got a pretty sound view of it, because I've never taken advantage of anybody in my life in order to be physical with someone. And so I find it extremely offensive that people seem to think that it's necessary that the older person is somehow duping the younger person into their arms. It certainly can happen, but it can happen whether there's an age gap or not. I mean, that kind of thing just plain happens. That's how some people roll. And it's also true that some people would never roll that way, with or without an age gap. And I hope to be in that category. I certainly try to be. And I have just come home from spending the day with someone who has been my lover off and on for years. And there's 26 years between us. And I don't really care if you disapprove of that. Because I know and she knows that there's never been anything other than the fact that we really like each other and we really fancy each other, and we both know that we can't be in a relationship because our lives are moving at different speeds and in different directions, but we really care about each other, and we enjoy each other's company. So what's the problem? The age gap thing for me doesn't just go into physical relationships of a romantic nature either. It also stretches into my friendships. My best friend in the world is my friend Jen, who I also call the Bean sometimes. And the Bean is just a year older than my daughter. She was born in 1989, so I'm 27 years older than her. And she's my dearest friend. She worked for me when I had my shop for a few years, and we became quite close friends during that time. And that has endured since then. When my last relationship failed in 2013, it was Jen who put me up for 4 months without asking me for a dime in rent. I gave her some anyway, but she didn't want it. She's a proper friend of mine. And her parents don't object to me being in her life, and never have, even though we became friends when she was still a teenager. But I treat my young adults in my life, I treat them as my equals in most ways. Of course they don't have the same experiences and the same level of sophistication or all that stuff, but they're still adults to me. And I find it troubling how people want to infantilize adults. In the comment section of JJ's video, the woman was saying to me about, if someone was 40 and the other person was 20, blah blah blah. And whilst I agree there's a potential risk of some sort of power dynamic at play which could be detrimental, I acknowledge that. But I also say, sorry, I think a 20-year-old is an adult. I think a 20-year-old who's making their own decisions has every right to be considered an adult. They have every right to be considered as a fully responsible for their own actions adult. They're 20, for fuck's sake. It's not like they just got out of school. You know what I mean? They're 20, and 20 to me is an adult. When I was 20, I was a DJ on the fucking radio station. You know what I mean? Was I as mature at 20 as I am when I was 30? Of course not. But that's not my point. You know, you never stop learning in your life, and you never stop maturing. That's certainly been the case in my life and the people who I've observed. So yeah, age gaps for me, one thing I wanted to bring up in this video is the fact that I think age gaps are like one of the biggest sort of taboos that sort of insidiously fester, you know, to a pretty large degree, I hope anyway. It seems to me that sort of, you know, cross-racial relationships are much more accepted now than they were when I was a kid, that's for sure. So I think there's progress on that front, and I also think you know, cross-cultural relationships aren't as frowned upon, and sometimes people marry outside of their faith even if they're really religious and so on. So I don't necessarily think that old taboos always pertain, but this taboo seems incredibly pervasive, and I know people who think it's extremely wrong to have any kind of relationship, whether it's just casual or, you know, an enduring relationship with someone who's significantly younger or older, and they just think it's wrong in principle, and if you press them on it, and they just go, if you don't know why it's wrong, I can't explain it. Well, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. It's not good enough. If the power dynamic is your issue, fair enough, but what about when that's not at play? What about, and don't tell me it's necessarily in play just because one person is older. No, 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 trust me. The younger person can be the one working the older person. I'm sure that happens a lot. So, you know, I think it's frankly naive to assume it only ever goes from the older to the younger. And I don't think it necessarily only ever goes from the male to the female either. I think the opposite is very easily true. A lot of people can be completely sort of, well, pussy whipped, I suppose, is one way to put it. And yeah, so there you go. I think the fact that it's so taboo, though, I mean, I think there's, you know, a few months ago, JJ did a video asking us all what we thought about incest, and some of the just the innate revulsion that some people have towards the idea of that, even if the people in it are consenting, I think is similar to how people sometimes just have this innate revulsion to age gaps. They can't imagine doing it themselves, and therefore they just go, ooh. But I don't think you should necessarily project that onto other people. You know, it's fair enough if you don't fancy someone who's particularly older than you or particularly younger than you, and no one's saying that you ought to. But I'm just saying, you know, that which doesn't affect you isn't really any of your business, for one thing. And as long as the people are of a mature adult age and everybody knows what's going on, and, you know, no one's lying to each other, I can't see any reason to be against it. What do you guys think? I'd like to hear your comments in the comment section down below, and I will see you again next week. JJ Talks is up next for tomorrow's video. Until next time, may the funk be with you always.